Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we're going to talk about Black Panther, which, if I believe the news, is a revolutionary film featuring never-before-seen thoughts and ideas, and it's so brilliant, and everyone should go see it. That is what the news said. What a lot of my friends told me was that it was an absolute just sea of a movie. 75% exactly. Passing grade. Like, wow. Definitely not gonna fail. And, I gotta be honest, I sort of agree with the latter. I kind of had a joke idea when I was gonna start this about, like, I was gonna start describing the movie, and the movie was gonna be completely wrong. And I guess I'm spoiling the joke by telling you this, but I was gonna start by being like, oh, Black Panther is a movie about a king of a fictional nation who's looking to find who goes to foreign lands and learns that it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you're from, what really matters is who you are, and that poverty and da-da-da-da-da. And then I was going to say, oh, just kidding, that's the plot of Coming to America. And then I was going to talk about how it was a compelling movie about slavery and the understanding that people are free and so on and so forth, and a powerful message about cultural history and inequality and so on and so forth. But then I was going to say, oh, just kidding, that's the movie Amistad. What Black Panther is actually about is a lot stupider than people are being honest about. Like, if you read the news, you wouldn't really expect the movie to be quite as dumb as it is, but it's actually a very, very dumb movie. I think a good comparison is to look at it and say, like, well, it's like Wonder Woman. I feel like the exact same thing is going on. A lot of people were saying, like, Wonder Woman is a revolutionary film. And what I'm convinced is going on is just that the internet has gotten really stupid and really condescending about what constitutes a revolutionary film, to the point where if a film includes a female actress as the lead, or if there's a lot of black people in it, then a lot of people on the internet just start saying, like, well, this is revolutionary, this is really important. And like I say, it's a little condescending, because although Black Panther is not a bad movie, and I think it is worth a watch, it's honestly not revolutionary like they're saying. It's very silly. I was actually a little bit excited going into it, and this is part of the reason why I'm let down. For one thing, I mean, like, people played it up, and I knew that the news was full of crap. I knew that there was no way that this was going to be, like, the top-notch movie. I especially didn't trust them after they said the same thing about Wonder Woman. But I was excited because I know really nothing about Black Panther, and I thought it was kind of cool that I was going to get to see a hero who I basically not really, who I didn't really know about. And, you know, I was going to get to see, like, what is Black Panther, what does he do, why is he a significant comic book hero? I was disappointed to find that they really didn't get much into the lore of Black Panther, or really address anything that I wanted to see. Like, I didn't come away from Black Panther feeling like I know more about Black Panther. I feel like I know about some things the characters did, but I don't really have a firm grasp of who they are, or what they represent, or what they're really trying to do. Because the movie starts off, and essentially the movie is really kind of about Wakanda. The main character is sort of Wakanda, but we learn nothing about Wakanda. Wakanda is a fictional empire that was built on a deep pocket of vibranium, which is a magical metal. It's the strongest metal in the world, most powerful metal in the world, and apparently if your country is built on it, it makes you the most technologically advanced country in the world. Wakanda likes to hide the fact that it's very powerful, for some reason, but it's controlled by 5 tribes. Well, it's actually controlled by 4 tribes, but there's a 5th tribe that just lives off in the mountain and imitates gorillas. So right away, I mean, like, I'll get into some things, I guess. Never mind, I'll hold my commentary on exactly why I don't see why this is so progressive. But, so they live in Wakanda. It's like the super advanced society, and the king of Wakanda is T'Challa, because T'Challa's father died, and so by right of succession, T'Challa is king. But the way that they choose their king is through a trial by combat. So they go to this rock, and they have T'Challa stand in this, like, puddle, and they're like, if anyone wants to challenge T'Challa and murder him, whoever murders T'Challa shall become the new king. And so they go through all the 4 tribes that are usually there, and all the 4 tribes are like, no, you know, I don't want to challenge him, I don't want to challenge him, I don't want to challenge him. And I guess this is to establish that there's some sort of harmony here in this system. And then the mountain tribe, who apparently doesn't normally interact with the rest of Wakanda, comes down, and they're like, we are gorillas, and we would like to battle. We're the gorilla tribe, and we'd like to battle you for the rights to Wakanda. So they fight to the death, and T'Challa wins. And everyone's like, all right, so T'Challa wins, that's fair, everybody's happy, there's no problem here. T'Challa continues to be king. And so right off the bat, you've got this, like, weird kind of tribal society. Like, I thought it would be interesting to see how the movie was going to depict a super futuristic, like, African society if you assume they had no Western influence. Like, this is like saying, like, well, suppose that China became the dominant power. Like, everyone kind of wears business suits in the business world now, but that's kind of like a Western sort of thing. So, like, what if China had risen to power? What if they'd been the dominant country in the world? And they'd influence the rest of the world to dress like them. Like, would we look more like a kind of a... Would we develop from sort of an ancient Chinese look, and people would wear more like robes and things like that? Would that be common? How would people look in Wakanda? And instead, kind of what we got was like this this idea that for whatever reason, Wakandans couldn't really like advance. Like, their government system was based on the trial by combat, you know, and so they and that doesn't work. Like, that's a system that doesn't work. Like, early on, like, in antiquity, it could kind of work if you were a warmonger kind of society. Like, if you built your entire society to be at war all the time, and Wakanda's never at war, but if you were at war all the time, then you would maybe want a good war leader to lead your country, because your country is a military junta, and you know, if the entire system is run by the military, then you want a guy who's very powerful, very, very war-minded, capable of leading your troops on the front lines. So that's why you would choose your leader through trial by combat, because you want the strongest guy to be in charge. And when that guy starts to get old and weak, you'd want to replace him with someone who's stronger. And so, like, leadership wouldn't last into old age, you know, it would just be like over time. That person would get a little older, he'd get a little weaker, he'd get a little soft, and then when someone was dissatisfied and had a stronger thirst for conquest, they'd overthrow you. Because apparently you can issue this edict of challenge at any time. There's not a specific time you have to do it. You just say, like, I want a battle for control of Wakanda, and then you do. So anyway, so it's kind of like this African society. They're all still kind of wearing, like, you know, there's a lot of tribal clothes, and some people look like they're sort of modernized, but other people look like they never really got past, like, they're still kind of, like, running around in shirtless, and the gorilla tribe is just, like, wearing furs, you know, and stuff like that. So it's not, like, kind of, like, what if we carried the African stuff on into the future? Like, what would they use? Like, there's not really a whole lot of thought that goes into it. It's kind of like they just take the old African style, and they just, like, give them laser spears, you know, so it's kind of like they didn't really advance. They're just like they're just like the same sort of primitive culture that you might stereotype, but which is like really advanced, like just like the rocks and stuff like that they would put in a sling. They're like laser rocks, you know. They have rhinoceri that they ride. They have rhinoceros cavalry. Like, it's just sort of that kind of like, yeah, you know. Okay, so all right. They I don't know. And then like the city itself though doesn't really follow that same deal. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, they have these like city backdrops. But then because they kind of want to make them feel like, oh, this is a black people country, I noticed that there was graffiti all over some of the city stuff. Like, if you really look at it, they drew it up to kind of look like more of there's a bit of like kind of an urban thing, but they treat it kind of more like the Bronx and stuff like that. So there's like graffiti all over and people just like writing their names on things. Like, they're in this hospital, and the hospital is just like decorated up with, you know, like street murals, things like that. So it's kind of like they mix a little bit of, I don't know, like American stereotypes with like African tribal stereotypes and mash it all together. And you know, it's whatever, but I don't see why people say that that's really progressive, because for one, it's a fictional universe, and for two, it just used a lot of kind of like stereotypes to create their things. So, you know, like, people are like, it's revolutionary, and it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, like, there have been revolutionary films, but I don't know if I would necessarily say that the whole world design for Wakanda was necessarily revolutionary. But anyway, that said, so T'Challa becomes king. And for most of the movie, he's just kind of farting around. There's really not any kind of like stakes that seem to matter too much. What they get wrapped up in for a little while is there's this arms dealer who's selling vibranium, and everyone's really mad at him because he killed some people to get his vibranium. So T'Challa says, I'm going to go and I'm going to bring that guy to justice. And this military, I guess he's like a military advisor. I'm not exactly clear who he is because, again, the world building is not very good. But they have this military advisor, and he's like, I really hate this guy. Promise me you'll kill him or bring him back to Wakanda. And T'Challa's like, I promise I will do that. So they go and they try to corner this arms dealer. And they meet some guy who works at the CIA. And because he's white, the Wakanda's referred to all the white people as colonizers. That's what colonizers. All the white people are colonizers. So they just like interchangeably refer to all the white people as colonizers. There's kind of this weird aloofness, like they just kind of come across as a little bit like racist, as a little bit narrow-minded, and they'll be fine. But the movie doesn't really own it. It just kind of like it acts almost like the Wakandas are smart for calling people that, and to me it was just kind of like all right, so this is sort of like a nationalist thing that they're doing. They just kind of like, white people, there's none of them in Wakanda, so to us they're just like this broad group that we sort of disparage. And again, that makes sense, like that the Wakandans would be like that, and I was going along with it, but when they were kind of like acting all smarmy about it, it's like, this is just typical racism. I mean, like, this is just how people are at their most banal, okay, movie. So anyway, though, so yeah, colonizers, snirk, they start working with the colonizers, and the colonizer is also there to kidnap this vibranium smuggler, and so they get a big car chase with the vibranium smuggler, and the action scenes are pretty good. Like, I gotta say this, the action scenes are good. The technology that they use is all kind of interesting. It's sort of clever. Like, they throw these devices on these cars and it allows them to just hijack the cars. One of the things that was really cool is they have like a remote hijacking. So they put this device on the car hood, and then someone back in like an office in Wakanda can just drive the car with like zero latency. And that's a pretty neat idea for a special agents kind of thing, for like a spy type of deal. It's pretty great. So you get this little spy element, but also around when they got into like a casino, and I started to get Casino Royale vibes because I really dislike Casino Royale. And I felt like as they started to get into like, the gambling and all this stuff, these stupid mind games that James Bond was playing, the movie got really slow, and I really disliked it. And the movie started to slow down for me. Like, I was starting to really kind of like lose my interest as they got into the casino and they started wandering around and they met the guy and they were like, "Hey, colonizer, da da da," and I was just kind of like, man. What is the overarching plot of the movie? Because right now there's nothing really that matters that's going on. Like, when are we going to get into action? And it picked itself back up. Essentially, the vibranium smugglers come into the casino, and they get in a fight, And so the fight picks the movie back up. It's not like a thoughtful thing. It's not like this is an important plot point, but it gets the movie going, so that it's not boring to watch anymore. So there's all this excitement going on. It's very visually interesting. It's captivating. So this is kind of where the movie prevents itself from being a bad movie. But I don't know if I would necessarily say that it was a good movie, unless you just really love action. Like, if you're a big action buff, then I feel like Black Panther is a good movie. But anyway, though, it gets moving and it carries itself along through these action scenes until finally they capture the guy. And so the CIA and T'Challa kidnap this guy out of Korea, because they're in Korea, South Korea, and then they take him to somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where exactly they take him, but they take him to some kind of place, and then this other guy shows up, and it turns out he's also from Wakanda, but he grew up in like California, I think is where they said he was from. So he's like some poor kid from California who is directly descended from like one of the princes of Wakanda. So he's been helping this guy smuggle vibranium. You see him a little bit from time to time. And he reminds me a little bit of Jamie Foxx, but he doesn't quite have the swagger that Jamie Foxx has. Like, Jamie Foxx he does a pretty good villain. Like, Jamie Foxx, like, when he's like, when he wants to do that kind of like street thing, like, he pretty well nails it. Like, when he was in Baby Driver, I felt like Jamie Foxx, he did come across as, like, a legitimately dangerous guy. I mean, like, I'm so familiar with Jamie Foxx, it's hard not to see him as Jamie Foxx in movies. It's kind of like the same as, like, when you see, like, Morgan Freeman or Sean Connery or, just any of those actors. Or, like, The Rock, Like, it's always just The Rock to you, like, any of these people. Like, this is that actor. He's so famous, you can... Or Ian McClellan, like, you just know them from the roles that you know them from best. And so you kind of, like... you like those actors, but, you know who they are, so... Anyway, though, Jamie Foxx, he does a really good job with this guy, and he reminded me... This particular actor... The impression that I got was like this role was written for Jamie Foxx, but they couldn't get Jamie Foxx. So they got a guy who could kind of do something similar to what Jamie Foxx would do, but he didn't quite nail it. I really wasn't rooting for him. He didn't come across to me as a badass. He was sort of more like a a whiner, is what I got the impression of. He's kind of like walking around. He's like, the world's not fair. You know, the world's not fair. Mad, angry. Gonna go blow up some stuff. And so you know, this sort of like kind of Jamie Foxx wannabe type of guy. And so anyway, Jamie Foxx wannabe, he shows up and he busts the arms dealer out of prison. And everyone's like, oh no, this guy escaped. But before they escape, they see that Jamie Foxx wannabe has a ring on that it's like a Wakandan ring. And so T'Challa goes home and he talks to one of his advisors and he's like, why has that guy got a ring? And then the advisor's like, oh, that, yeah. See, a long time ago, when your dad was in California, your uncle was also in California, but he was a spy, but he was selling vibranium to drug lords, to gangsters in like the California ghetto, you know. And at the time, your uncle was saying that the California ghetto, you know, if they had really good weapons, then they would rise up and destroy the government, you know? Because that's what, you give people, like, really advanced weaponry, and that's just what they would do, right? Is they would take over the entire U.S. government, you know, from the ghetto. And so this was kind of like this weird, they got this, like, weird justification, where they flash back, and they're like, oh, Uncle Guy, like, why did you steal the vibranium? And he's like, people in the ghetto have it really hard. Like, you don't understand how hard it is being black in America. And the guy from Wakanda's like, oh, and the king of Wakanda, he's like, nah, that's not okay. Like, that's not an excuse to steal weapons. And he's like, no, if I armed all these people in the ghetto, if I just gave them all laser spears, then they would rise up and they would take over the government. And then Wakanda would be in charge of America. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. And so they kill him. But he's got a son, right? And so they just leave the son in California for whatever reason. And they say that the reason why they have to just leave him in California is to maintain the lie. And I guess the lie was that the uncle just went missing? Like, I don't know. If they brought back the son, then they would have to admit that they killed him. But I mean, he pulled a gun on a guy. Like, the uncle pulled a gun on the advisor. And, I mean, I don't know. I don't understand why they had to tell the lie in the first place, or why they had to maintain the lie. They really don't go into detail about, like, what Wakandan tradition or what Wakanda law required them to tell this lie or to leave the child in California. But for whatever reason, they leave the child in California, I guess so that he can become a villain. And so, anyway, at this point, it's not exactly clear how or why this guy is going to go to Wakanda and create the problems that he does. But it turns out his name is Killmonger. And so the cousin of T'Challa, Killmonger, what he does is he then kills the arms dealer himself and then just flies to Wakanda. And the reason why he can do this is because apparently his dad told him about Wakanda. He was like, yeah, Wakanda, it's a great country. Like, you should totally go there one day. So Killmonger flies to Wakanda with the body of this arms dealer, even though he was actively seen, like, wearing this identifying ring, you know, like, kidnapping the guy in the first place. Like, he stole him from T'Challa. And so he just shows up with the guy and he's like, here he is, I've killed him and brought him to you. And then, like, of course, because T'Challa is king, they bring him to T'Challa. And so the guy's like, I'm the son of one of the princes, and I deserve equal respect. And they have this whole flashback. Like, they have to have a flashback to explain how this even works. And again, this is how you get into, like, it's really not that amazing of a movie. Because if you have to have this big, long flashback to explain, like, oh, no, the dad explained Wakanda. And he did this thing, and he did all this stuff, and there's all these, like, questions left unanswered. But the point is, here's the bare-bones explanation you need to understand how he even gets to Wakanda in the first place. He doesn't know anything about Wakanda, really. He doesn't know about Wakandan politics or, like, Wakanda traditions. Or at least it's not demonstrated that he knows much about them, really. So he just shows up in Wakanda, and T'Challa's like, go away. And he's like, no, I challenge you to battle to the death for the right to the Wakandan throne. And then T'Challa, for whatever reason, agrees to the battle. So T'Challa loses the battle. He gets stabbed, and he gets thrown off a cliff, And then suddenly everybody realizes that choosing your leader through trial by combat is really, really stupid and doesn't scale well at all for an advanced civilization. And T'Challa's family is all like, oh no, like, boy, we probably should have stopped doing this, I don't know, centuries ago. Gosh. And so suddenly they're trying to figure out how to not have Killmonger be their king. And it's great, because Killmonger gets to be in charge, and what he does is he goes to the council, and he sits down, and he's like, you know what, Wakanda has been an isolationist for too long. What we really need to do is we really need to go out and just start conquering land. And the militaristic guy, the military advisor, I don't know if he's actually the military advisor. Like I say, they really didn't explain very well the whole, like, politics of Wakanda or what Wakanda is about or any of this, really. And anyway, though, so the advisor to Wakanda, he's like, yeah, I'm super behind this. Conquer lands. That's what I've wanted to do for a long time. So glad we're doing this. And so Killmonger, he goes, yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to conquer all the developed nations. Like, we're not going to conquer our neighboring territories. We're going to conquer, like, France and the United States and China, apparently, because they talk about going to, like, Hong Kong. And so anyway, so they're just like, yeah, we're going to conquer China and Japan and America and possibly Argentina, because why not? You know, we'll just conquer some countries, you know. And so they're like, all right, great. How are we gonna do that? And he's like, all right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna send laser spears to the Bronx, and then I'm pretty sure that the people in the Bronx are frustrated enough that they will rise up, topple the entire U.S. government, and that's the whole plan. And the military advisor goes, that is the best plan I have ever heard, and I will fight to the death for you. I will go to war. In fact, if T'Challa turns out to be alive, and he comes back and tells us to stop, I will fight T'Challa. I will die for this plan. And so Killmonger's like, good, great. I'm glad that we're all on the same page and that we all agree that this is not the stupidest thing we've ever heard. And that somebody here doesn't understand politics better than I do. Like, the opposition to this plan is not that it's an idiotic plan. The opposition is just that, oh, Wakanda's never gone to war before. Like, that's the thing that they're like, well, you know, traditionally we don't go to war. And Killmonger's like, well, we need to get away from tradition. You know, we need to destabilize the governments. And I just really liked, like if you think about, like, what would happen, like, what if you showed up in the Bronx and you just started handing out laser spears? Like, what would actually happen? Like, people in the Bronx, you know, they're American citizens, right? Like, they're not some, like, marginalized militant group that's looking to overthrow the government. Like, they compared it to what they're like, oh, I learned from the Americans and what they're doing in Iraq. Like, they keep going back to this. They keep, like I said, like, call people, like, colonizers. They're like, oh, white people are colonizers, and they keep talking about, like, oh, what the Western nations did in, like, oh, I'm just learning from them, I'm just copying what they did, you know, imagine how they'll feel when the shoe's on the other foot. But the movie doesn't really understand how, like, Iraq and America are different politically or different geographically and whatnot. Like, in Iraq, the reason why you can create stability by arming these groups is because, like, Iraq is kind of like, I don't know if some of you people, I'm sure that a lot of you have heard this from, I don't know, the news or history or anything really, but, like, if you're informed, you might realize that Iraq is kind of a sprawling nation with lots of uninhabitable land. And they talk about it being kind of tribal, and I don't know if that's necessarily the most accurate way of thinking about it, but basically, you know, you have kind of these regions, and the government doesn't have firm control over everywhere in the entire world. Like, I mean, like, Saudi Arabia is, like, tons and tons of desert, and they've got the cities, and they have kind of a centralized control over the urban areas, but then kind of once you get out in the less urban areas, you know, there's a lot more separation. The government doesn't have a lot of direct intervention with these people. It doesn't really provide a lot, you know, it's not really, like, building tons of infrastructure out there, and so you get these groups that kind of grow up, and they sort of take care of their own out there, and then they sort of militarize, and that's where you get the destability, or the instability. Because these groups are so separate and there's so much kind of, like, uninhabited land, and the government doesn't have a lot of influence in all corners of its territory, you get these armed groups that show up, and they have authority over, like, other regions of Iraq or whatever, and then they start to grow, and they kind of establish a stronghold and a base, and then they decide that they're going to conquer the lands. And so, like, you look at, like, ISIS, for example, and ISIS isn't even thinking about conquering, like, oh, we want Iraq. What they're thinking about doing is they're like, well, we're gonna control the entire caliphate, specifically kind of like the caliphate that was run by the Ottoman Empire, you know, not like the Moroccan caliphate. You know, we want this particular caliphate. They have a caliphate in mind that they're trying to rebuild, and so on and so forth. And so, like, you kind of get this, like, you can destabilize Iraq for a lot of reasons that, it's not just because people are in poverty. But if you try to just, like, arm people in the Bronx with, like, laser spears and say, like, all right, go fight the U.S. government, well, a lot of people in the Bronx are, like, they work at, like, Olive Garden and McDonald's or, like, retail stores, at Walmart. They work at, like, nursing homes, It's a low-income area, so, like, a lot of the people there are not making tons of money, but like, it's not like political instability. It's not like there's an armed military group. It's not like there's a separate authority in the Bronx. Like, there's gangs and things like that. And I'm sure that the gangs would do things with the weapons, but gangs don't really overthrow governments usually, at least not in the United States. It's a different political situation. So the idea that you would just, like, go to the Bronx with laser spears and then expect them to overthrow the government, it just seems like crazy and naive and stupid. Like, all they would really be doing is just shipping these weapons that previously the rest of the world didn't have to the rest of the world. Like, it sounds like that's what Killmonger's whole plan was just to lose his military advantage. Like, and it was really stupid. Like, I didn't understand why they would do this. They were just like, yeah, what we'll do is we'll lose our military advantage over the rest of the world by giving the rest of the world our technology, and then that's the whole plan. Like, that's it. That's the whole plan. But anyway, though, for whatever reason, the Wakandan hardliners were totally behind this plan, even though it was a failing plan. It was a plan that was going to fail, and it was a plan that would cost them their advantage, and they had everything to lose from this plan and nothing to gain. They really weren't going to be able to, like, take control of the United States. I mean, like, if they were going to occupy the U.S., they would have to actually send forces, and that would require adequate ground forces. I mean, like, maybe the Wakandans would require fewer people than the U.S. would to cover all their land. But I mean, like, you still have to kind of control the lands you take, and the U.S. is a really big territory. So just conquering the U.S., like, Wakanda is supposed to be this very small, isolated, like, African country. And even if they had very advanced technology, like, logistically, it would still be challenging to take over a territory as large as the United States. But they weren't just going to conquer the U.S. They were going to conquer the U.S. and China and, I guess, maybe Russia even. Like, just the whole world, I guess. And so anyway, so stupid plan. Didn't make any sense. Killmonger didn't know what he was talking about. But for whatever reason, the military arm of Wakanda was so far behind this that they were willing to die for it. So, what they do is, also Killmonger decides to burn the plant that makes you the Black Panther. The movie doesn't really explain what the Black Panther is. I think that he's superpowered. I think that when you become the Black Panther, you get superpowers. But they really don't go into it. Like, there's a spiritual component. And what I compared it to, and I thought was kind of funny when I realized what it was, is it's a very religious thing, it's a very spiritual thing. Like, every new king is given the power of the Black Panther, and, like, you die and you're reborn. And I said, like, well, you know what that's like? That's like if you had England, and, like, every single English king was actually like King Arthur, and essentially his power was passed from king to king by God, like, there's this religious component to the whole thing. And again, that makes sense, but it's it's just kind of like I don't know, it was sort of like, all right, so I follow that, but I don't see why. I get the symbolism, but what does being King Arthur do? Like, you get Excalibur, right? Like, Excalibur is a magical sword, so that's what you get for being King Arthur. But, like, what do you get for being the Black Panther? Like, super speed, super strength? What does he have? I don't know. The movie doesn't say. So anyway, though, so Killmonger is made a Black Panther. And then he's like, all right, just burn all the Black Panther flowers. And then they burn the Black Panther flowers, but T'Challa's family steals one of the flowers. And so what they decide to do then is they go to the gorilla people who live in the mountains, who have had no interaction previously. They're kind of disgruntled and they dislike the rest of Wakanda. And so they're like, oh, these guys will want to overthrow Killmonger. They'll probably fight him to the death. And at the time I was thinking, like, that's really funny. That's kind of like, going to Dong Zhuo and asking him to take over the Han government because you don't like the way things are running right now. You're like, yeah, these people who, like, from all the way over here who would be willing to come attack us, like, they're perfect. Like, that's exactly what we need. So basically, they're, like, inviting Dong Zhuo to come down and take over to take over China. It's like, this will never blow up in our faces. They even comment on it. They're like, I'm not sure. Like, we might be worse off than just letting if Killmonger runs things, he's an idiot and he might be manipulated. But if we give power to, like, the gorilla men, they understand Wakanda and they might be more dangerous than Killmonger. But they're just like, nah, Nah, I hate Killmonger so much I'm willing to take that risk. I'd rather have Dong Zhuo than the eunuchs. So, yeah. Anyway, they go to the gorilla people, and thankfully the gorilla people have enough sense to say that they don't want anything to do with this crap. They're just like, I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. This is all super stupid. The entire Wakandan government is stupid. You know, this is why we don't interact with you people. You're all idiots, and I hate you. And so then they're like, but we brought the Black Panther flower. And so the Gorilla King, he just kind of looks at it, and he's just like, okay, so... Plot hook, I found T'Challa's body and he's not dead. So they go to T'Challa and they give him the Black Panther flower. And he's reborn, and then he goes to Wakanda and he challenges Killmonger to another duel. And so Killmonger's like, I reject the one-on-one thing. Military guy, remember when you said that you would fight T'Challa to the death for my plan of giving away our military advantage to just like random-ass people in the Bronx? Well, guess what? It's time to stand up and take care of that. And so the military guy's like, yeah, I'm totally on board with this brilliant plan of yours, and I will fight T'Challa to the death. So an entire like war breaks out, T'Challa versus the Wakandan military. And then like it turns out that everyone has allegiance to their own factions. So like some of the Wakandan military, specifically the women, turn on Killmonger, but like all the men go to fight T'Challa. So it's kind of like you know, I don't know. I don't really like... I don't know. I guess the girls just like T'Challa. He's popular with the ladies. So the lady guards all turn on Killmonger, and there's a big fight. There's lots of action, and they call in these like armored rhino cavalry, which was cool, but it got so stupid and so overblown, and there was so much like super advanced technology that I briefly forgot that they were on Earth. Like honestly, there was a point they were starting to take off, and I was thinking Star Wars in my head. Like, I was expecting them to enter space. I thought they were gonna fly into space. And then I remembered they were like, yeah, we gotta get those ships before they reach Hong Kong. And I was like, oh, right. This is all on Earth. I almost forgot. Almost forgot that this is based on the planet Earth. So, yeah. I mean, like, really, it just felt like Star Wars. They might as well have called in, like, Jawas, you know, like, the battle in this. They might have had laser blasters for all that mattered. And so, anyways, they have this big, like, Star Wars-style battle with, like, Jedis and all this other stuff. And then they go down in the trains, and T'Challa and Killmonger have this battle on the rails. And finally, Killmonger gets stabbed once. And that's it. That's all it takes. Like, he just like sits down on his knees and he's like, that was really good. This is a good stab. And T'Challa's like, thanks. You know, I'm glad I only had to do that once. Like, most people, when they get killed by stabbings, they have to be stabbed like 40 times. So I'm glad that it only took one to kill you. and so they establish earlier in the movie that they can save someone like from a spinal injury. Like, if you get shot in the spine, Wakanda can save you. They have the medical power. So what happens is, like, Killmonger is dying, and so T'Challa just kind of like puts his hand on his shoulder, and he's like, you know, we have the medical technology to save you from a stab wound in the gut, right? And so Killmonger looks at him, and he's like, no, I'd rather be like the slaves that jumped off the boat because they knew that being dead was better than slavery. And then he dies, and T'Challa's just like, okay. And then the movie ends, and T'Challa resolves that, you know what he learned from all this? He learned that Wakanda needs to be less isolationist and needs to open up and start interacting with the rest of the world more. And I don't really know how he drew this conclusion. Like, the movie doesn't really do a good job of establishing why this is a message. It's kind of like a no-brainer message, you know, like the world's becoming more global and we have to be able to interact with each other kind of on a more, in a more pragmatic and open platform. You know, like Killmonger's idea of like, well, we just need to kill all the white people is kind of a dumb... You know, it's not really a very workable solution. It never had any pragmatic sense in the first place. But, you know, like I say, I don't really get how they went from, like, military isolationists to realizing that they needed to interact with everyone. Like, I mean, they kind of had some points that were sort of like, yeah, I guess I could see this, but that wasn't really the conflict of the movie. And I'm not really sure, like, what exactly was the overarching message. Killmonger just kept talking about slavery and about inequality in America and things like that, but it was kind of like not really very, wasn't very grounded, it wasn't very sophisticated, like it didn't really feel like Killmonger had his finger on the pulse of anything. It felt more like he had his finger on the pulse of Twitter or Tumblr. And then, like, I mean, like, I feel like Killmonger really probably just read a lot of angry Twitter tweets and a lot of angry Tumblr posts, and he was like, yeah, I'm gonna take over Wakanda, and I'm just gonna rule Wakanda based off of what Tumblr says. And that was kind of like his whole plan. And it just comes across as very ignorant, very stupid. Like, why would you try to run a country like this? Like, there's no pragmatic way this is gonna work. And yeah, and then the movie ends, and they have like the stingers at the end, and like one of the stingers is like T'Challa gets up, and he's like, Wakanda is ready to help the rest of the world. And then like someone in the UN is like, but how is a third world country of farmers going to help the rest of the world? And then everyone kind of smiles, like, ha ha ha, how funny, like Wakanda's so powerful. But it's actually a valid question, because even though Wakanda is very powerful and they have a lot of technology, throughout the movie they demonstrate that Wakanda is not a unified place. They are not really very sensical. They don't really know what they're doing. They choose their leader through right of combat. There's not really like Wakanda's not stable. They're not really in a position to help the rest of the world, because as it is, it felt like they were falling apart throughout most of the movie. Like, all it took was just a little bit of provocation and Wakanda kind of imploded. So it's really weird for them to be at the end of the movie and for them to act all smarmy about like, her, Wakanda's so great, when in fact, like, if you tried to run the world in the Wakandan way, the world would implode. So Wakanda really, I mean, like, aside from vibranium, they really didn't have anything to offer the whole rest of the world. I mean, like, sure, the UN guy didn't know that they had all that vibranium, but, you know, definitely, aside from, like, I don't know, social aid with their insane amounts of wealth, they really didn't have anything that they could do. And I'm not even sure that, like, T'Challa necessarily had the political backing to enact these reforms that he was going for, because it felt like he didn't. It felt like they were important parts of the government that were actively trying to sabotage that from the very start. So, you know, I don't know. It didn't feel like he had really a clear-cut victory. It just established that Wakanda had its pants around its ankles and was tripping a lot. And and this is why they had to be isolationist, because if they tried to expand it all, they had no way to control anything that they were doing. They could barely control the little city-state that they had. So, because really, that's kind of what Wakanda is. It's just like a city-state. As far as I could tell, it was just one big city, and that was it. And, you know, anyway, yeah, the slavery stuff, it was really ham-fisted, really unsophisticated. It really wasn't very clever. It really didn't address anything having to do with inequality. It didn't really look at, like, why things are unequal or what you might do to solve it. I mean, its solution for inequality was to have a fictional country step in and just introduce technology that doesn't exist to low-income areas, I guess. And again, they kind of took it all from like a racial perspective. It wasn't like a geopolitical perspective. It was like a racial perspective. There was even a line that I thought was kind of funny where I just don't know like what might have happened during the writing process, because like at one point Killmonger's like, think of all the black people who aren't doing well. Like, what do we like, why didn't Wakanda like step forward and help all the black people? And very sensibly, T'Challa says, I am not the king of black people, I'm the king of Wakanda. And I just thought that it was such an eloquent like rebuttal to the entire conflict of the film. Of like, Wakanda is Wakanda. It's a fictional empire, and T'Challa is the king of that fictional empire. He's not the king of black people. And I don't know why there was so much conflict around the idea of like, why doesn't Wakanda help black people? It's like, because, you know, in antiquity they might have been like a lot of our neighbors were black people and they were our enemies. I'm not the king of like that's like saying like, why doesn't China help North Korea? And it's like, well, China's not in control of North Korea, China's in control of China. You know, like everyone in Asia, just because they're all Asian doesn't mean that they're all like the same people. You know, all the black people are not the same people. All the Europeans, just because they're white, they're not the same people. Like, there's different, like, Russia and England, they're both white people, but that doesn't mean that they're a unified people. You know, like, this is not how politics works. This is not how the world functions. You get like that because you're stupid and you don't understand people on a level that complicated. You know, people make stereotypes and think that you can represent everyone as these monolithic wholes because they're too dumb to realize how complex humans are. You know, like no one is a demographic. Everyone is an individual. You are not white people. Like I am not white people. I'm Greg. And if you're black, you're not black people. You're like Dave or whoever you are. You know, you are not your demographic, and your demographic is not you. You're part of a demographic, but a demographic is just some kind of like broad statistical thing. It's not even, it's abstract. It's not real, you know? So this kind of like weird like racial sentiment of like, yeah, why doesn't Wakanda help the black people? It's kind of like, because black people is just a demographic, you know. It's an abstraction. It's not like how do you help, like why don't we just help a demographic? Like why don't we help people with I don't know, like their middle toe is longer than their big toe. Like that's a demographic. Like, you know, you could just like look at things like Wakandans might have statistically other things in common, you know, like that long, you know, middle toe longer than big toe. Like if that's really common in Wakanda, maybe that's also common in other. Why don't we help people in that demographic? Like, I don't know, you just choose this demographic. Skin color is easy, but it's also very dumb. It's very baseline. It's not really a very good political basis to be doing things. You need to kind of, if the movie really cared about inequality and about the differences between race and how people are treated and things like that, it would have to look at the underlying problems and figure out like, okay, so there's like this history of racism that's caused this inequality in America, you know, and it varies from country to country. Like it's really not, you can't apply one fix to the entirety of all black people, because it depends on where you are and why things are that way. And like not every black person needs to be lifted up out of the Bronx, because not every black person lives in the Bronx. You know, it's just kind of like this. It's very stupid. It's very ignorant to kind of try to portray it that way. So I don't know. So that whole that little exchange of just like, why don't we help the black people? Well, because I'm not the king of black people. That, I don't know. Like, it just got me to where, like, I'm not sure what the exact message of the movie was or what it was trying to be. And I don't know why people are acting like it was a really progressive movie or really revolutionary or whatever. I mean, I get why, but only from the most, like, cynical way. Like, I understand from a very cynical perspective why a bunch of people are saying, oh, it's super revolutionary. And I feel like it's just because there was a lot of black people in it. But I mean, like, I don't know, like, I mean, I grew up in the 90s and, you know, Eddie Murphy was really big and Will Smith was really big and Whoopi Goldberg was really big. And I'm going to be honest, I really enjoyed a lot of the films with those actors in them. And plenty of those things, like Amistad was a really good movie. Coming to America was a fun comedy. Like, everything Will Smith did was like a blockbuster for the longest time. So for you to be like... oh, you know, this is the first film to feature black people or whatever, or like it's so important because it has black people in it. It's like there are so many films that were so much better than Black Panther that featured like black protagonists and so on and so forth. And it just feels really weird and condescending to ignore all those films that were really good that I remember from my childhood and then just say like, no, this one's revolutionary. Like this one's the most amazing. And it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't get it. It was a fine film. Action-wise, it was a fine film. But it was like Wonder Woman, in my opinion, which I also give kind of a very average score. You know, like, all right. Like, yeah, good action. I didn't hate anyone in the film. Like, I wasn't mad that I went to go see it. I would recommend it. Like, I think it was a fun film. But, like, it's not 10 out of 10. Like, writing it was really stupid. Like, the whole plot was really stupid. The message was kind of obfuscated by a lot of things. The message about inequality wasn't grounded very well. They could have done way better with that if they really wanted to tackle that subject. I mean, almost, like, seriously, like, the reason I wanted to joke with Coming to America was because the idea of inequality was honestly better explored in Coming to America. And it's also about a fictional king from a fictional empire. You know, Eddie Murphy plays, I can't remember the name of the country that he was supposed to be from, but it was a fictional country. And what Coming to America was about was he was like, he went to Queens to look for a queen. And, you know, Queens is like this low-income area, and he's trying to blend in as a common person there. And so it's sort of like you can't judge a book by its cover, you know, or based on the amount of money people are making or that you think they're making. You need to judge people based on their human qualities. And it's kind of funny because, like, when the woman that Eddie Murphy is interested in, when she finds out that he's a king, she was falling for him when he was just a guy who worked at like a knockoff McDonald's, but then she gets mad when she finds out that he's a king, not because she cared about the money. She didn't care about the money, she cared about his honesty. And the fact that he was lying to her really hurt her. And so that was kind of a message that they were driving through, is it's like, it's not about where you're from or how much money, it's about your honesty and your personal integrity and who you are and so on and so forth. And that's kind of a timeless message that applies to everyone very broadly. And I mean, like, Coming to America was not a really hard-hitting film. It was a comedy. You know, it wasn't like something that was making this really deep, moving, you know, it wasn't like a tearjerker that really just got you thinking, but it probably hit that idea of social inequality and what it means to be a person better than Black Panther did, you know, and a lot of films do. And like I say, like there's just so many different films that focus on like inequality and racism, things like that, and they're way more powerful and they're way more meaningful and they're way more moving. And I just don't, you know, I don't know. But whatever, you know, whatever. If people wanna fillet themselves for having seen Black Panther, then I guess they can. Like I said, it's not a bad movie, and the furor over it's gonna die down in a couple of weeks anyway. I mean, it did for Wonder Woman too. Like everyone was like, revolutionary film, Wonder Woman. But then the truth of the matter is that it's not that revolutionary. And unlike, say, Disney classics, which continue to be bought for kids, like I'm gonna buy Lion King for my child. Like, that is how much of a classic and how timeless of a story Lion King is. Like, that is a good film, and it will never get old. But Wonder Woman, I don't think that people are gonna be buying Wonder Woman for their kids, you know, on into the future. Like, I don't even think that, I don't really even hear people talking about Wonder Woman hardly at all. It's not like a, you know, as far as, like, what do films do right, it's kind of like, well, Wonder Woman had a female lead. And it's not that much. And, like, what did Black Panther do right? And it did lots of things right, but it also did a lot of things that really weren't that impressive. And I just don't think that it's gonna be a revolutionary film. I don't think it was the amazing film that they said it was. I don't know that that filmographers or film buffs are gonna be looking at it and saying like, well, this is the most influential film of the decade or anything like that. They're gonna say like, yeah, it was a box office success. It spoke to some attitudes of the time. But that's just it. Is it speaking to attitudes at the time, and in 10 years, you know, we may not see that. I mean, ideally, realistically, I would hope that in a generation or so, Black Panther will seem completely weird and stupid. Like the stuff that they say, the conflict that they're predicating the film on. What I would hope for is that it would sound really dumb in another generation. Like, I'm not confident. Like, what I think that we would need to do to get out of that would be to have some serious education reform, healthcare reform, set up, like, retirement safety nets for people better than the system we have now. There's a lot of reforms we'd have to go through, and I don't feel like our government is moving towards those things. But ideally, in a perfect world, Black Panther's not going to be timeless. So, yeah, I recommend it. Go see it. I make it sound terrible, but that's because it's actually really stupid. But it's a fun watch. Like, it's a fun ride, just like Star Wars was a fun ride, even if it was a little stupid in some places. Just like Wonder Woman was a fun ride, even if completely stupid most of the time. Black Panther is a fun ride. It's a good film. I enjoyed it. I found it very dumb, but, you know, liked it. 75%. Absolute average grade of a movie. Go check it out if you've got the time. The theaters are positively packed because everyone's been told it's the best film in the world. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll catch you all next time.